And we're live. Hello, everybody. My name is Jacob Hansen. I'm the host of Thoughtful Faith, and I want to welcome you to tonight's live stream. Joining me tonight is my friend, Steven Pynakker. Steven Pynakker, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Okay, I'm just making sure it's streaming on my channel, and it is. So we're both doing a stream for a co-production of Mormon book reviews and Thoughtful Faith. Jacob, it's always a pleasure to have these conversations with you. This is actually part of a series of conversations I've been having with people in light of the Charlie Kirk situation, the assassination, as well as the brutal Mormon massacre that occurred in Michigan a couple weeks ago. And so I first had a conversation with Colby Reddish, and then I had a conversation with John DeLynn, and then I had a conversation with Dr. Kyle Bashirs. And now I'm having a conversation with you tonight, and you're the one that suggested that we do a live stream on both our platforms, and I'm always happy to collaborate whenever possible. And so thank you for doing this tonight.
Yeah, I'm stoked. So, and thank you for coming on. Anybody who doesn't know, Steve obviously runs the Mormon Book Reviews channel, which I often tell people is sort of the Switzerland of between Mormonism and anti-Mormonism. So you had said you wanted to talk about some of this stuff. I've had some things on my mind, and I figured if we can get both of our audiences in the chat with each other, that could be pretty exciting stuff with lots of back and forth comments. So, as we get into this, first and foremost, I actually wanted to give you a little bit of time first, because I know this is something that you wanted to talk about this week. It's something that you've been talking to different people about. So I figured I'd kind of let you go first before I start to go into some of the things that are on my mind.
Okay, that's great. And, and Jacob, I think this has been a very difficult time for a lot of people in this community. And it's also caused a lot of tensions going on. And part of the reason I've been having these series of conversations is to really lower the temperature. I'm not telling people to change their beliefs. I'm just asking how you say things and do things is very important, especially if you have a platform, because unfortunately there are unhinged people in this space that could do harm to people based on things that we do and say on our platforms. And I feel like we can model that today by having two people on this show that don't agree with a lot of things, but we've been able to show that we can have important conversations and be positive. Jacob, I just wanted to ask you, this is the first time we've been on since all these things have happened together. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to kind of ask you how are you doing? How did you process all this stuff when this happened? I know there's a lot of angry, hurt people out there. And how have you used your platform to maybe try to lower the temperature?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, one of the things I did was I helped to promote the fundraiser. The whole big fundraiser for the shooter's family actually began in the Ward Radio text thread. It was Dave Butler in that thread. It was like, hey, I've seen a bunch of people on X talking about maybe doing this. I'm thinking about doing it. We're like, yeah, great idea. Like, we'll promote it. And then obviously it went viral and was a big thing. I've made some videos on the subject. Obviously heartbroken for the victims and heartbroken for everything, but also in light of the Charlie Kirk situation, I think it's a time for more conversations, more speech, more engagements with each other, not less. Because I think when people isolate into echo chambers, don't talk to each other, dehumanize one another, that's where problems happen. Now, people may know I'm very sort of offensively oriented in my apologetics and in my channel to kind of like point out things that I think are wrong. But I also am a big believer in like not dehumanizing and being hateful towards people. I have a mantra for my channel that's on my website itself that says hard on ideas, soft on people. And I try to do that. I really do. And
do you sometimes fail at it though too?
I think we all fail at it to some extent, but I think overall I don't fail at it that often. I don't try and personally attack people. I try my best to go after their ideas and why those ideas are false. I really don't care that much about people's character or motives because I don't know their character or motives unless I actually know them personally. But I do know that the ideas that people spout and teach oftentimes are wrong and dangerous. And in some cases, when they are engaging in persistent, intentional, and public attacks on the church's fundamental truth claims, that is someone that I consider to be an anti-Mormon.
Okay, so that's interesting, and I wanted to us to have that conversation. It was what is an anti-Mormon? How do we define what an anti-Mormon is? I have my definition, and you and I've had conversations, and we've also said, well, let's wait for the show to have that talk, And so I'm like, okay, let's do that.
I'm actually interested. I'm interested in the people in the live stream. Oh, we even have Kobe Reddish in the live stream. Good. We're definitely getting people from both sides then.
Good.
I'm interested in the people on the live stream, what their definition of an anti-Mormon is. You guys in the chat, I want you guys to start dropping it. If you want to super chat it, we'll read your definition on the air. Yeah, an anti-Mormon for me, here are the criteria for someone to meet it in my mind. Okay. It isn't enough just that you don't believe in the church's claims. It isn't even enough that you let people know that you're against the church's beliefs. Like you, Stephen, you don't believe in many of the things the church teaches. You're you're an evangelical. So there's a difference in your beliefs and mine, but I don't think that you're an anti-Mormon because you're not engaging in intentional, continuous, public attacks on the fundamental claims of the church.
Okay.
Right. And I would add one other thing in here. I guess I'll leave it at that. But even worse sort of anti-Mormonism for me, like I actually sort of get people like Mark Driscoll to a certain extent, even though I think he's it's terrible in 50 million ways. But these evangelical pastors, they believe something and they're trying to propose an alternative worldview. The lowest kind of anti-Mormonism to me is the kind that just attacks the church and offers nothing. Like in my mind, it's just like, what grounds are you even attacking us on? Like you don't even have a coherent worldview, but you're trying to attack us. And like of all the problems in the world that you could go after, like really? This is something I genuinely do. I genuinely look at people who engage like the Bill Reels and the RFMs of the world. And I'm just like, you guys, if I just didn't believe the church was true, that would mean that the church is nothing more. And I'm not a Christian. I don't believe in any Christianity or any of it. Then all the church would be is like this group of kind of people with weird beliefs who bring people casseroles and are kind of a little eccentric about some things. But like on the scale of like big problems in the world, like, why would I ever dedicate my time, effort, and energy into attacking like Joseph Smith? Like, Muhammad is a far worse influence on the world. There's a million other influences on the world that are way more detrimental. And most of the things they even attack the church on aren't even things specific to Mormonism. They're just like general Christian ideas that they hate and attack. And so in my mind, it's like, just be honest and say that you just are like anti-Christian. You're just anti-Western Judeo-Christian values. And when you actually boil it down and look at a lot of these people, that's really what motivates them. Their motivation is they are against sort of fundamental principles of Western civilization. And it's more political than anything. That's why people in the sort of anti-Mormon crowd, generally speaking, all fit into a relatively closely linked sort of political ideology as well. So anyway, that's kind of my thoughts on what anti-Mormon is. Anti-Mormonism is.
But does your definition include perhaps progressive Mormons that you feel are critical of the church? Would you put them in the anti-Mormon category?
If they are publicly and intentionally, repeatedly, I say continuous, I should say repeatedly, eroding fundamental truth claims of the church, I would, absolutely. You can be a member of this church and be an anti-Mormon, 100%.
Now, the question I have for you, Jacob, is this the sign of a healthy view to have about progressive critics of your church? And I want to kind of broaden this out in like somebody like Gary Wills, who wrote the book in the 1990s called Papal Sin. Gary Wills is still, as far as I know, if he's still alive, a member of the Roman Catholic Church. And he's highly critical of the church, but the church has made accommodations for his criticism. As a matter of fact, I'll even take it another step further, that when the church was canonizing Mother Teresa, they had Christopher Hitchens in as the devil's advocate to argue against her becoming a saint. So their willingness to even engage like somebody like Christopher Hitchens in their process of canonization of a saint. So to me, I look at that and I'm like, man, that's really cool. I like that they have all these different voices within Catholicism, from very, very conservative to like Gary Wills, who are critical of the church.
But Christopher Hitchens isn't a Catholic.
No, I know he's not a Catholic, but what I'm saying is it's his engagement with the church in a way that
I'm all for engagement with critics, but I'm also very clear that you're not within, like, there are lines between where people are and where they're not. When a person is claiming, I am a believing Latter-day Saint who has a temple recommend, but I reject all the fundamental claims of the church, it's like, you shouldn't have a temple recommend, because go listen to the questions. You have to believe certain things in order to hold that recommend. In fact, you have to believe certain things in order to be baptized.
So my question, though, would be, what if the person who might be a progressive critic within the church, a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is criticizing the church because they want to help the church, reform the church, and make the church maybe a more transparent place, a more safe space for people? Would you, in other words, their intentions are they want to stay and they want to help reform the church. Is it wrong for them to do that?
No, within the priesthood channels, they can do that. The church has a priesthood structure for a reason. The problem is when you go outside of that priesthood structure. The priesthood structure governs the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. If you don't like that, well, I'm sorry. That's the way that Jesus Christ set up this church. That's who we are. That's how it operates. And if you go against that priesthood structure repeatedly, intentionally, and publicly, you will be excommunicated for such, which is what happened, for example, with John Dehlin. So no, it isn't just that you have an intention to want to make the church better, because you're not the arbiter, or anyone. An ordinary member of the church is not the arbiter of what is good for the church. That ultimately, we're a top-down structure, not a bottom-up structure. And yes, leaders will interact with members, and you can talk with your local leaders about the issues that you have. And people get really frustrated because, like, but no change happens. It's like, well, it's not your church. It's Christ's church that's run through his agents.
So let's just then take that to a question I'd asked to you before, and that is the idea: what would happen if your church in 10 to 15 years were to recognize gay unions in the church, and this is a top-down decision that was made by the brethren? Where would Jacob Hansen fit in that whole conversation?
See, this gets down to an ecclesiological question about, do you ultimately just go with the brethren no matter what they say? Okay. And if you don't go again, if you're not going to go with the brethren kind of blindly, like no matter what they say, I'm going to accept it, then you have to have some sort of a rubric for which you would say that they have crossed a line to which I will not follow them into. And I believe that they have done something seriously wrong. Right now, for me, what is that standard? And that's the real deep conversation. So for me, that standard is sort of the collective prophetic witness. If they go against the collective prophetic witness, I'm going to be very, very, very skeptical. And I don't mean that they introduce something new. What I mean is that they introduce something that's contradictory. So, and so a contradiction, like, here's an example. Would I follow the brethren if the brethren came out and said, Jesus did not rise from the dead, and we are to bow down and worship Joseph Smith? Would I follow them? No. On what grounds? Are they the ultimate authority? Actually, I don't believe they are. In fact, I believe that the Spirit is the ultimate authority, but the Spirit, to me, informs me to follow the collective voice of God's prophets, because they are a reliable source. And when I look at them collectively, that collective witness, this would be an aberration. If they were to say something like that, that is an aberration. So when I look at something like the redefinition of gender and the redefinition of the importance of gender, contrary to what Jesus Christ teaches about what gender is for, when he says that for this reason he created them male and female, that the two may become one flesh, and for this reason shall a man leave his father and his mother. That to me it is, along with all the rest of the collective witness, and when I look at what is actually driving it, which is social pressure of the time, I say this is social pressure making a decision, not, I wouldn't believe it was from God without some sort of a special revelation.
So 1940s version of Mormonism, and somebody used the collective witness model about the Black priesthood band, would they not be making the same argument you're making now?
No, because nothing in the do you believe the collective witness of Scripture supports the idea that sub-Saharan Africans should be denied the priesthood?
I certainly would not take that position, but there was a.
I agree with you.
But I would also say that within even Christianity, especially in American evangelical Christianity, there was a sense that blacks were under the curse of Cain, and that they
were wrong.
Right. But I'm saying is that the issue though is that these arguments were still part, and as a matter of fact, the church in the 1940s.
Well, could I ask you a question, Steve? Could I ask you a question?
Sure, absolutely.
So here's my question for you. So do you think that the collective witness supports the notion that black people are cursed?
I think 1940s version of Mormonism does.
No, not 1940s version of Mormonism. I'm talking about the collective witness of the Bible, for example, and Mormon scripture. Does it support?
I think that there's some very problematic things in the Bible that have been verses that have been used by racists and by slave owners to justify their worldview.
You're right, but you would say that they're wrong, correct? And that they're misinterpreting the scripture.
I would say they're morally wrong, but I don't know if they're necessarily scripturally wrong.
Really? You think that the scriptures actually teach that sub-Saharan Africans are not to receive the priesthood?
I think that the scriptures teach that slavery was acceptable.
Yeah, but that's not the same thing as the priesthood ban. The priesthood ban was specifically based on the idea that certain races were cursed because the Hamitic hypothesis was that the people of Ham, his descendants, are the African race, and that they're cursed.
Right.
I don't believe that anyone who says that the African race are the descendants of Ham are wrong.
Okay, and I would agree with you there. But what I'm trying to say is, using your collective witness model, there was a period of time, for a very long period of time, in which many Christian theologians and thought leaders and producers of books and literature were advocating that there were separate races that came from Noah's Ark. And that's what.
But if they were wrong, then they were wrong. And they were an aberration from the reality of what the collective prophetic witness states.
What I'm trying to say, though, is that I'm putting us in 1940s Mormonism. And if I'm looking at the culture as a whole, Christian culture as a whole, you had segregation being practiced. You had apartheid forming in South Africa. You had all these things. And you had a letter from the first presidency saying that the Black priesthood ban is doctrine. Mm-hmm. So I'm saying I'm applying your collective witness model not to you and I's 21st century worldview, but to a 1940s perspective. And I'm saying is that I think your collective witness model would have been advocating for the Black priesthood ban.
I think would you help me to, what is your understanding of the collective witness model? Like what I mean by that?
So basically from my understanding, and you could, of course, I want to make sure that I clearly articulate it. I may not. So please feel free to step in. But it's this idea. And again, I also, before I answer that, can I ask you a question? Where in Scripture and in the Doctrines and Covenants, the Bible, and all these places, and the prophetic utterances of your prophets, seers, and revelators, do they reference a collective witness model? In
the law of witnesses.
Okay, so you're saying
the law of witnesses is just a microcosm of what the collective witness is. It says, look, if you have one witness to something, that's not sufficient. Even Christ himself said, my witness, if it's me alone, isn't worth anything. The more witnesses you have, the more sort of established something's become, and especially if those witnesses are part of the prophetic tradition and hold prophetic authority. The more prophets you have saying something, the stronger it is. And in fact, what I would argue, just to go back to what my model actually is, when you say the collective witness in a particular time period, see that misunderstands the model. The model says, what does it say over all of time? If we were to take all the prophets and put them in a line, and yet 500 prophets all in a line, and it's throughout, all the way from Adam to Russell M. Nelson or to Dallin H. Oaks now. Okay, like there would be some of them that would say things that the rest of them would look at them and be like, wait, what? like Brigham's out there like, Adam is God. Everyone's like, wait, what, Brigham? Like, what are you talking about? So yes, in Brigham's time, that there were ideas that were stupid and wrong, but I don't look just at Brigham or at any one time in the church, even today's time. I look at the collective, and I do say that and I look for contradictions. I don't look for, You can really reveal something new that's consistent with the collective witness. But when you contradict it, I'm not saying I will reject it outright either. I'm saying that I'm going to be way more skeptical. And here's the way it works with sort of gay marriage and all that. If gay marriage comes to the church, barring a deep and powerful revelation from God to me, I would reject it because I have every grounds to on what has already been revealed to me and to the prophets.
Okay.
So
just also interestingly enough, of course, this idea that there being a curse on Ham comes from us also in the book of Abraham regarding Egyptus. Now, the question I have for you is that this idea that there'd be a cursed group of people that are not able to have the priesthood, whether they're sub-Saharan African or not, some could interpret it one way or another. But it does sound to me like there's precedent, even within Mormon scriptures, that groups can be denied the priesthood based on their lineage.
Yeah, but you have to make the case that God has actually somewhere given a revelation to us telling us that sub-Saharan African peoples should not have the priesthood. I have never been shown any such revelation, and therefore I don't believe it. Now, we've gotten way off topic here.
This is a phone call, right?
So no, it's all good. Actually, I want to just on this topic. Colby Reddish has dropped in a super chat, and I don't want to leave it hanging there. He says he's just quoting here from the days of the prophet Joseph, even until now, it has been the doctrine of the church, never questioned by any of the church leaders, that the Negroes are not entitled to the full blessings of the gospel. That's wonderful. I know. I'm not sure who said that exactly. It's probably one of the leaders, I would say, in the mid 20th century, I would imagine, said this.
I think that's from the first presidency in the 1940s.
Yeah, that probably is. And I would say, I would ask them directly, okay, can you give me the direct evidence where Joseph taught that? Because there's been a lot of historians that have been looking for that evidence. There's been nothing. And in fact, the prophet Joseph actually ordained black men to the priesthood. So the church leaders here, again, I'm not some blind shill who just follows my leaders no matter what they say. I actually investigate what my leaders say, and I see if there are good reasons to believe what they said. And the ones who said this were just wrong.
But then you would make the argument, though, that Joseph Smith never preached in favor of polygamy. As a matter of fact, he actually fought polygamy publicly. How do you take that then with this statement about Joseph?
Oh no, I think there's great evidence that Joseph Smith both taught and practiced polygamy. Doctrine and Covenants 132 being the most obvious example.
But the polygamy deniers are making the same argument. Show me evidence.
Yeah, but they're wrong.
Taught. Well, they're asking the same question you're asking, which is show me evidence that Joseph Smith taught this. And then
you could go watch my debate with Jacob Isbell. I lay out all the arguments, and I thoroughly won that debate, and I'm not concerned about it. So
okay, fair enough.
So to get back to our and thank you, Colby, for the super chat. I appreciate that. So getting back to anti-Mormonism for a moment.
Yes, absolutely.
So now, for those out there, do I think Steve is an anti-Mormon for bringing up this and having this conversation and pushing me on this question? No, not at all. I do not have a problem with people who want to genuinely engage around topics, talk about that. I think that's fine. That's not anti-Mormonism. What anti-Mormonism is, though, again, I said that it's public, intentional, repeated erosion of faith in the church's fundamental claims. Now, I would ask you, Steve, what is your definition? What constitutes an anti-Mormon?
I think an anti-Mormon is somebody that's great. And I gotta, this is again, we're actually developing this in this conversation, which I think is important. We wanted to save it for the conversation. So I've been thinking, okay, what is an anti-Mormon? I think like when I look at like anti-Semitism, right? Anti-Semitism, there was soft anti-Semitism in which you couldn't belong to the country club. You were kind of eliminated from certain parts of polite society. All right. So that was kind of a soft anti-Semitism that existed in this country for most of its history, and probably still in some quarters. I'm sure there's some country club here in America that still doesn't admit Jews. Right. So we have that. And that could be because it's a little bit of othering. They're different. It's different religion, different culture, different part of Europe, all these different, factors that would have been kind of put down by the WASP dominated country of the time. and that's always been there, you know. But then you have like a pernicious anti-Semitism that led to pogroms and you know, all this, the blood libel. Then we had this all accumulate, and again, let's be really honest here. Martin Luther wrote the book, The Jews and Their Lies. Okay, so we have to say that there's also Christian responsibility that that we have to acknowledge, and we also have to acknowledge that the Catholic Church up until the 1960s basically blamed the Jews for.
But did he ever encourage violence against Jews, Martin Luther?
That's a good question, but I think this is where the ideas come from, right? Like when.
So what would you say, that Martin Luther was an anti-Semite, though?
I would say that Martin Luther had anti-Semitic views. Absolutely.
Okay.
I don't think anybody would question that, but I think
it doesn't mean you have to advocate for violence to be an anti-Semite.
However, and again, that's why I took that post from Mark Driscoll with that AI slop that he generated, asking the question, are Mormons Christian? And I said, you know, 100 years ago, again, 1920s, and this is how I phrased it, 100 years ago in the 1920s, there was some conversations in certain segments of European society in which they were asking the question, are Jews human? I wonder whatever became of that. So this is the idea of our ideas and words can have consequences by asking those types of questions. And again, we can have a theological debate about, you know, what more type of Christianity Mormonism is it in, is it out? Is it, you know, are they, obviously they're not Nicene Christians or creedal Christians in that sense, but does that, you know, and we can have those polite conversations, but in light of the massacre of those people, asking that question was really inappropriate because it's demonizing them. So my point being is that we all know where Mark Driscoll's coming from when he's asking that type of question. And in light of the fact that a ward was burned down or a stake center was burned down and 4 people were dead, I think we just have to reconsider, like, okay, what are we trying to do when we do have these provocative conversations? And so I kind of look at, there's this buildup to eventually it does end up people going into death camps. And so my big concern is, especially within the evangelical Christian community, is the rise of Christian nationalism, which is essentially to establish a theocratic state, and only Christians, in particular Trinitarian Christians, will be allowed to have the levers of power. And so that would exclude your people. And so that concerns me as well.
So I'm interested because you're talking here about this idea of the rhetoric. You know, you begin to make it seem like Mormons are dangerous. Is that something that you would? Do you think Mark Driscoll makes us seem like we're dangerous, and that can be a promote people to violence?
I think when Mark Driscoll, after the Charlie Cook shooting, put it out there that the shooter was a Mormon, I think that's exactly what he was doing.
He was implying that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I want to take a look at something real quick, because I don't like. So I want to put up on the screen, like, just the Mormon Stories podcast,
okay,
and the way it portrays us, because, you know, it'll talk about, you know, what is this kind of stuff. You know, Mormon sexual abuse speaks out. Mormon bishop sexually abuses children. In the shadow of Mormon prophet, suffering abuse. Alleged abuser is a current Mormon bishop. Spiritual abuse and suicidality. When high-level Mormon leaders sexually abuse people. Mormon church facing sex abuse and trafficking lawsuits. What do you think? Is this anti-Mormonism?
Yeah, you know, that's a great question you're asking. I guess the question I have for you is, do you believe that John Dehlin is an anti-Mormon?
Yes, very clearly. Okay. He is engaging in public, intentional, repeated erosion of faith in the church's fundamental claims. That's what his channel is literally dedicated to.
Now, we've had conversations, and we've already been public with this, where you told me last year that you did a 180 on John and believed that he doesn't hate the church, he doesn't want to destroy it, he loves the church, and he wants to reform it. Now,
I do, and let me address that, because I think you're right, and I'm perfectly fine with saying I actually think John is sincere in that he wants to do good. Mm-hmm. I actually believe that. I believe what John is trying to do with these videos is he's trying to, as he sees it from his perspective, and I'm not a mind reader, but he thinks that by exposing things that he thinks are unhealthy and bad and untrue in the church, that he will help make the church a better place. Okay. Now, and so, but the problem is that he believes that the fundamentals of the church are actually bad, or that there are a lot of bad actors in the church that need exposing, but he doesn't sort out those bad actors from the church. Like, again, going back to just those things that we just had on the screen here, like are these like nuanced titles that talk about, or does this seem to paint with a very broad brush about Mormons generally, instead of talking about, does he point out that the church has, like, this is absolutely everything in this is contrary to the church, and this abuse has happened contrary to what the church teaches? Does John show that we actually have much lower rates of abuse within the church than in almost any other sort of civic or even religious organization in the country? Has he looked at the research on that? Does he highlight that? Has he had on Jennifer Roach who did an excellent fair presentation showing that our rates of abuse in the church are lower? Or is he propagating the narrative about us that the church is dangerous?
So I want you to scroll down one more. Just scroll down.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have Mormon bishop sexually abuses children. That's Colby Reddish. Now, I just want to share why I think it's important to have these types of conversation. Is that Colby, there was a bishop that was sexually abusing children in their church. Yeah. And Colby Reddish, as a parent, and his wife felt that the church was not a safe space to raise their children when they were covering up the sexual abuse of a bishop. I think we need to also try to understand, why do people leave, right? And sometimes they leave because this isn't a safe space for my kids. And they
I would again, that is exactly and now here's my whole thing then. Well, if the church is not a safe place for your kids, so much that why would you want anyone to go to that church? Does John Dehlin actually believe that Colby was right to make that sort of judgment? If so, hold on a minute. If the church is so bad that people can't put their kids there, why would you ever say that the church is a good thing and a good place? It's horrible. It's so bad you can't even go there with your children. And then I'd ask, on what grounds do you make those allegations? Are you comparing it to public schools? Are your children more likely to be abused in a public school or in the church? And okay. Colby, do you put your kids into a public school? Because if you put them in a public school but not in the church, are you being hypocritical? Because your kid is actually more likely to be abused at school and in other private institutions than in the church.
Okay, and those are fair questions to ask. But then, I've always had these conversations with my Catholic friends growing up, because they'd be like, we're the one true church. And I said, well, if you're going to make the claim that you're the one true church, I'm going to hold you to a higher standard than anybody else.
That's fine.
And so I think that
you can do that. But the problem is that I'm fine with being held to a high standard. But what I'm not fine with being held to a high standard by people that don't actually have an objective standard that they can hold it against. See, one of the things I actually appreciate about the Christian anti-Mormon movement is that they have a standard by which they are evaluating the goodness of the church. And I want to, like, I'm fine with having that sort of conversation, right? Like, does the church actually measure up to Christ's standard? But when your standard is arbitrary and you're upset at the church because it won't accept transgender ideology when it comes to children, like, well, by what standard is that wrong? We shouldn't accept trans ideology especially amongst children, and it's abuse to do that to children. And so, but I'm a bigot for saying that, and the church is bigoted because it says that. Well, by what standard? By the arbitrary whims of the social norms of the last 10 years that came out of nowhere? So I don't know. Real quick, Colby Reddish put something up here, and I don't want to ignore him. You can read this one, Steve, because he wants you to ask me it, and so I'll answer it.
Okay, Jacob, please ask Jacob if there's any legitimate criticisms. His definition of anti-Mormon doesn't matter if the criticism is accurate.
No, I'm all about if there is a criticism to be made against the church, you can make it, and make it with in the appropriate venues. That's what I do. I've made criticism of the church, and people like Jim Bennett have come on your show and have said, Jacob Hansen, you have done something horrible because I said that maybe hiring Aaron Sherinian might have been an error, which maybe it was. I don't know. I'm still undecided on that. So now I do believe that public criticism of the church is something that you're not supposed to do as a member of the church. I think that those criticisms are to be brought internally to the priesthood leaders, and that you should make known your things there. I also have the ability to sustain or not sustain. And I actually believe that members who do not sustain leaders should be frank about that fact. Mm-hmm. And when leaders do things that are wrong, they should stop sustaining them. And Colby, if you felt that the leadership of the church generally did not do enough to stop sexual abuse in your ward, and you want to oppose the prophet of the church, you should do that. And you should let your leaders know that you no longer support that. And so are there any legitimate criticisms? Like, I think the church makes mistakes. I think we all do, local leaders, general leaders at all levels. And I think that there are venues and ways to handle that are appropriate. It's the same way if you're in the military. If I was in the military, I'm not allowed to go out and publicly attack the president. Does that mean that I can't talk to within the right channels within the military about decisions I see making that I think that are wrong? Sure. So to me, it's like, the church is not a democratic institution. It is a hierarchical institution. It is a kingdom established by Christ. And so it's like a top-down institution is like a basketball team. I use this analogy sometimes. If you disagree with what your coach is saying, in the middle of the game, are you going to get into an argument with your coach? Or if he's making the wrong call, do I still go about trying to make the thing work? And then maybe after the game or in private, I talk about why things aren't working. And ultimately, if I think the coach is just a terrible coach, and it's like, I'm not going to be on his team anymore. And fine, leave the church.
So, one of the reasons why I have concerns in my community, see, I was talking to a podcaster last week, and we had a pretty rough and tumble conversation that I felt like we kind of understood each other a little better afterwards. So I thought it was a positive conversation. But I was just pointing out that, that person that was motivated to go and shoot those people at the ward in Michigan was using terminology of they're demonic, the Mormons, it's Antichrist, and literally went into that stake center with the idea that Mormons worship Joseph Smith over Jesus, informing him of the question, Jesus or Joseph Smith. And that person, I think we both would agree, had Jesus on his lips as he was shot. And so that, to me, I almost feel like John and the critics, the ex-Mormon critics of the church, are being critical of the church in the way of you have ex-Jehovah's Witnesses do the same thing. You have ex-Scientologists do the same thing. And you have ex-evangelicals doing the same thing, where they're criticizing and they're going through their deconstruction process and all that. But then
can you name a single, let's say, ex-Catholic, and Catholicism is way bigger than Mormonism. Can you name a single ex-Catholic channel that literally just dedicates itself primarily to that has 500,000 subscribers on YouTube?
Off the top of my head, I can't. And
it's funny. I asked that to a Catholic apologist, and they were like, "Yeah, we don't have there's no Catholic equivalent to a John Dehlin."
Yeah, and again, their John Delins are still in the church on some level, because, like I said, Gary Wills of Papal Sim, best-selling author, New York Times best-selling author, was very critical of the church, but still was within the confines of the church as well.
We have a lot of people within our church that are critical of the church.
Okay, right, but I'm just telling you that I think if Gary Wills was making the criticisms of the same type of criticisms of your church, I don't think he would have been excommunicated. So again, it's just a matter of how the church has handled criticism. Plus, the Catholic Church has 2,000 years of being able to deal with critics and all this kind of stuff. So I think that's kind of well established. I think my only point is that when I look at the rhetoric that's been produced by the Protestant evangelical community, in particular here in the United States of America, it has been highly negative and very demeaning, very demonizing, very othering of Latter-day Saints, making them out to be dangers to society, dangers to Christianity. I think that rhetoric is much more dangerous than anything I'm seeing from the ex-Mormon community. That's how I just feel like our rhetoric is more dangerous. I think it has more of an implication because there's so much at stake. And this person literally thought he was shooting demonically possessed people who wanted to destroy Jesus and Christianity. That's how goofed up this guy was. But there's enough propaganda put out by the Protestant community or the evangelical community, anti-Mormon community, that could be a motivating factor for these types of people. So to me, the bigger concern should be the rhetoric that's coming out of like the God makers, that's coming out of Mark Driscoll and others, Jeff Durbin, Steven Anderson. These are very hateful people who are not much different than Westboro Baptists, who were celebrating the death of American soldiers, and we know that they've used some very virulent rhetoric against Latter-day Saints, and also Catholics and Jews and LGBTQ people. In other words, they tend to be bigots in more than just one field as well. Does that help you at all with how I differentiate between?
To some extent, but again, let's go watch. We could just go to let's go to the Mormon Discussions YouTube page and take a look at how they portray us. Do they portray us as dangerous, abusive, and all that? Let's just take a look. We can talk about it. Right. We can just look at it. Let me put it on the screen here. So, as I go through this, can trust sex abuse hotline fails again. Here we have RFM and Colby Reddish pointing guns at and shooting at Austin. Or not Austin.
Austin Fife, right?
Austin Fife. That's kind of interesting a month ago. And not only that, these were the same guys who were saying that they were very, very concerned when Elder Holland talked about the muskets and trowels, right? That was deeply problematic, but nobody seems to have mentioned much about this one. What you get out of this is that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is false. It's manipulative. It's harmful. And, oh boy, we got Hitler in here. And so this sort of rhetoric, and now let's go to Mark Driscoll's page real quick. Okay. Now what's interesting is on Mark Driscoll's page, if I look at his most popular videos, I don't even see Mormonism in here. Mm-hmm. In fact, what I see him doing more than anything is talking about how oral sex is bad and how gays are bad and all that kind of stuff. And I think that he's despicable in so many different ways, but I don't even see a single video in here about Mormonism.
Yeah, I saw there's that one about the Jehovah's Witnesses you scrolled by.
Okay. So there may be some, and obviously he does make videos about Mormons. My thing is that I think that the difference is numbers. Okay. In every group of, 100,000 or 1 million people, there's someone that's a total lunatic who will take things to an extreme. There's a lot more evangelical Christians than there are ex-Mormons, right? And I think that partially has to do with the fact that something like this happens. But I'm having a very hard time seeing this idea that we are in a church, like Colby Reddish is out there saying that's so dangerous that he can't take his kids to church, that isn't going to make people in some way think, that it's financially manipulating people, it's sexually abusive, it's bigoted and homophobic, it's just full of lies and deception. And then those very people want to say, don't call us anti-Mormons, but do call Mark Driscoll. I agree with you. Mark Driscoll is an anti-Mormon. I guess I'm just trying to understand in your definition of anti-Mormon, why he qualifies, but why, RFM doesn't.
Well, first of all, I mean, RFM is still a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and it has a good relationship with one of the members of the bishopric that came on his Christmas Eve special.
And that's very unfortunate. He should be excommunicated immediately for his own good.
That's what you meant, but his local leadership thinks it's fine.
And I think they're making a mistake, because it's based on the clear definition given by the brethren, who are a higher authority than the local leadership. It's very, very clear that he's in rank apostasy. So, and he's leading people out of the church continually. Anyway, go ahead before we get to the super chat.
I guess my whole thing about this, Jacob, is that I think that the rhetoric that's come out of the evangelical world against your people has caused people's lives to end. I think we can see this happening in the 19th century. We also can see the retributions happening with your community at massacring people from my community during Mountain Meadows. What I'm saying is that I'm more concerned about that spirit re-entering this space to where we have religious violence occurring against each other, which has happened in the past. I'm much more fearful of that than anything that John Dehlin is putting out there than RFM is. I think there's a real threat to your community from a lot of the demonizing rhetoric that's said about your people. Again, antichrist, demonic. These are the words that can cause unhinged people to do what they did. I think that when I watch Mormon Stories and I watch these other programs, I know where they're coming from. Look, do I agree with the tone of these programs? No, not all the time. Do I feel sometimes they cross the line? Do I feel like, yeah, maybe they should be a little bit more open and understanding? I think it was a good thing that this Wednesday, during the announcement of your new first presidency and new prophet, seer, and revelator, I was on Mormon Stories on their live stream talking about it. In other words, I want my voice to be in those spaces. I want it to be in your space as well. I also think that it's good that we're helping facilitate conversations with these people to help bring the heat down, which I think is really important. And we know behind the scenes, there's these conversations that are happening. Whereas in the evangelical world, I don't see that same sense of, oh, guys, maybe we ought to watch what we say. I was really glad that I went on my program and said, evangelicals, please don't protest at General Conference this weekend. Okay. In light of everything that was happening, begging them, just don't do it. This is not the time or the place to do it. I also think that evangelical activists often against the church, and again, there's some good people that are well-meaning and who do want to have good dialogue, and even some of those that are out there at General Conference want to do that. So I don't do everything in the broad brush. But I do feel like there's so much stuff that's put out by my community that is very toxic and very hurtful to your people, that I'm more concerned about that. And I feel that my role is to try to bring the temperature down in my community, which historically has been much more harder on your people than even the Exmo community has ever been. And so I feel like that's the important role that I can play, is to help bring down the temperature as best I can. And again, they don't even want to talk to me because they're not interested. They're, with some exceptions, they're not interested in turning it down. They want to keep ramping it up, like Mark Driscoll. And that's what concerns me. I'm genuinely concerned about the stuff that's being said. Again, we have doctrinal differences. Yes, we do. We should not be using terms like demonic, antichrist. This is just beyond the pale, and it's not Christ-like at all. So that to me is why I feel much more passionate about the negative stuff that comes from my community than I do from the ex-Mormon community.
Well, and obviously you being a part of that community, you have a bigger stake in holding them to that standard. However,
I think that's important. I think it's important to be in our own communities, shining the light on some of the issues in our community as opposed to other communities. And so I think that, because I think there's a lot of just really toxic places in my community that need to be rooted out. And so I'm just more concerned about it. And again, look at it this way too, Jacob. One of the reasons, and this was really one of the reasons I got back into faith, was watching an episode of Mormon Stories. And that led me back into my faith, when he had interviewed Dr. Christopher Thomas, who wrote the book, A Pentecostal Reads the Book of Mormon. And Christopher was ministering to John. I tell people church service broke out. And not only was he ministering to John, he was ministering to me as well. And that led me back on this path. If that episode did not air on Mormon Stories, there probably is no MBR. I'm probably still an atheist. So I just want to say that I can't just dismiss that that they have. Look, I helped facilitate to get Rod Meldrum on Mormon Stories. I've helped facilitate to try to get other faithful voices on Mormon Stories. And John has been talking to them. And the final episode that he did with me on the 5-parter was How Mormonism Saved an Evangelical's Life. Okay, on Mormon Stories. That ain't going on any evangelical anti-Mormon program. And so I feel like that John has an ability to try to communicate to people, made attempts to have, like that news program that a lot of people were critical of, but had 2 members of the church on there. So I think he's made a good faith effort to communicate to people in a way that I don't see happening from the Mark Driscolls, the Jeff Durbins, the Steve Andersons, and others.
I can see that to a point. But again, if we just go to the Mormon Stories podcast site, let's just look at the last videos he's posted. Just nothing but erosion of the church's claims. I mean, here's one. The Mormon law firm told me not to report, referring to like sexual abuse stuff. People need to recover from Mormonism, almost like it's an illness. The Mormon church alienated her from her family. I actually know this story a little bit closer because I know them. Mormon polygamy with Native Americans, miracles, demons in the United Order. I mean, this is like, on what grounds would you look at this content and say that this is someone who loves the church, as John claims?
But you've said yourself that he does. Look, I just don't think that John Dehlin wants to destroy the church.
Well, by destroy the church, see, this is one of the problems. John, if you take something and you transform it into something that it is not, you have destroyed the thing that originally existed. Okay. John wants to transform the church so that it's not what it claims to be. Okay. In that sense, John wants to destroy the church, because the church, if the church's claims as it stand are true, that it claims to have, like, he wants to change the church from thing A to thing B. And if you change it to thing B, thing A no longer exists.
Do you think a 19th century Latter-day Saint would recognize the current church today?
Yeah, with some exceptions. There are things that have changed, but under core things, Christ is our Savior, that he was the Redeemer of the world who rose from the dead, that the Book of Mormon is fundamentally true, that that all of the Christian doctrines within it that are in the center of it, all of our articles of faith that we essentially still believe. There are changes, but in the core fundamentals of the truth claims of the church, they largely are the exact same as they were, at least in the fundamentals. Let me real quick. I got a bunch of super chats here. We have Kiori, looks like I'm not sure. Looks like a Christian. Demons and unclean spirit always confess the true Christ. You can't claim that Mormons are possessed by demons and that the church believes in a different Jesus. Doesn't work, man. I think that's more addressed to you. What do you think?
I don't. I guess I don't really understand what this
I'm trying to see what he's saying here too. You can't claim that Mormons are possessed by demons and the church believes in a different Jesus. Doesn't work, man. I'm not sure I understand it either. If you want to send another, clarify that one, I appreciate it. Let's go next one. Colby's got one here. Jacob, you called us psychotic, unhinged, lunatics while attributing things to me I never said. Spare me the pearl clutching over a joke thumbnail. All right. So if I said things about you guys personally, I will right now publicly apologize. I lose my temper sometimes too, and will use rhetoric that I shouldn't use. As far as attributing things to you never said, I think there was an episode where I attributed that, but then I made a correction video and posted a correction in the end of the video clarifying that. And I think I also might even put it in a pinned comment. If I didn't, reach out to me. I'll clarify it.
Yeah. And by the way, Jacob, would you like to ever have a one-on-one conversation, or even have me facilitate a conversation between the two of you? I think I mean, he's a good friend
It
of
would just
mine.
depend on the topic. I mean, I am open to it.
I'm just saying, like, even privately off the record, and then maybe do something publicly
Yeah,
as well.
I've talked with Colby. In fact, we were going back and forth last night. It wasn't a super positive exchange, but we were talking on Facebook Messenger with each other. So I communicate with Colby, and I've told him he so basically he made some claims that I had challenged him to debate Book of Mormon historicity, and I never did that. I never challenged him to debate that subject ever. I did challenge him once to debate if transgenderism is real, which he backed out of. So we were going back and forth about that. So, and he was claiming, and him and others have claimed that I challenged him to a debate on Book of Mormon historicity, which it's like, fine, provide the receipts. I post the where I said it, because I don't.
I'll leave it to you. But if you want to do both of those conversations, and we could do it on my platform, I'm inviting you both to come on to talk about both those subjects.
I'm. Let's put that in the. Let's talk more about it later.
Okay.
So, all right, Jacob, should we consider the progressive voice, even Jim Bennett, anti-Mormon? No. I don't think people. Again, I hate this sort of progressive conservative. Like, I don't care about that labeling. What I care about is it true or is it not true? And how does it align with what the church's doctrines are? And the problem is that much of the progressive voice is out of line with the church. And increasingly, a lot of people that aren't progressive have crazy ideas, Connor Boyack and others, that are just like wildly out of alignment with the church and that are getting borderline anti-Mormon. So, I'm for listening to everyone and talking with everyone. Alan Young, thanks for the super sticker. Colby Reddish, again, I'm insanely disappointed Jacob continues to attribute to me words I've never said. Not a smart play. Not sure what that's referring to specifically. Again, if I've said things that you never said, I'd be happy to apologize. All right. Blake Westmoreland. The rhetoric DeLynn and other antis put out is what evangelicals use to define Mormonism as demonic. What do you think about that, Steve?
I just don't think I do think, and I was actually challenged that the other day. Is like, well, these evangelicals will use some of this anti-Mormon stuff. I said they're just being lazy. I think that when Mark Driscoll does it, I think a lot of these ex-Mormons who would see evangelicals using their materials to attack the church would actually probably condemn that, because I don't think they would want evangelicals to be using their stuff that way as well. Now, that's just my gut opinion. I also think too is like most of your ex-Mormons are atheists, so evangelicals are going to have some very low views of them as well. So I don't think they would be as authoritative. Sure, they'll use some of their materials, but honestly, I think that they'd rather just make shit up, and I'm sorry if I cursed, but I see a lot of that happening in my community too.
It definitely does. Well, let's just take a look here. So we have Alyssa Grenfell. Does this stuff look demonic? Certainly seems that way. Raised in a cult. My husband's not gay. Cult voice. Utah public schools. So, the truth about the Book of Abraham and the evidence. The Mormon wedding and how weird it is. Why, here we got literally a Twilight and like fangs that she has here. And she even has the Godmakers movie here. And she basically goes through it and says, yep, this is what we believe. So, I mean, there has to be some crossover. Would you at least be willing to say that Alyssa Grenfell is an anti-Mormon?
Okay, just to be fair, I've had very minimal engagement with her. Okay, a little bit, and I haven't really watched much of her materials. Okay, so I can't honestly give you an answer on that question because I don't feel like I'm as familiar with her and her work as I should be. Partly because over the last year and a half, I've kind of disconnected from a lot of these spaces because it was just getting to be a little too much. So the rise of Alyssa has been kind of one of those things where I haven't really been tracking. I will say, though, that it does concern me when I do see her wearing temple garments and getting photographed by, was it the Wall Street Journal, in that story. And I'll give you an example. So I was in Utah a couple years ago, and I found myself in a room. Unbeknownst to me, in this room were the latest temple garments that were sent to this Christian ministry that I was visiting. And they were looking at the garments and inspecting them. And I remember that moment happened, and I said, okay, I'm not going to make any jokes. I'm not going to try anything on. I'm going to be respectful of these garments because I know these are sacred to these people. And I feel like when people do those kind of things, I think they really ask themselves, why they're doing that. You're being offensive in a way that can be very hurtful to people. And so I'm bothered by that, because when I had my opportunity, I didn't yuck it up. I said, okay, well, I'm curious, because I'm a curious person. So I did look at them, but I didn't make light of it either. I feel like that's just a personal conviction I have. So I am bothered when they take, just the same way you see the evangelicals holding the sacred garments, making fun of Latter-day Saints. I feel like, I don't know, I just don't feel comfortable with that. And I don't think people should be doing that kind of thing.
So, I mean, if Mark Driscoll were out, with images, let me real quickly just do something here. If Mark Driscoll was out like this with the temple clothing, I'm going to take it off the screen just out of respect. But if Mark Driscoll had a bunch of pictures of himself posted like that, would you consider that an act of anti-Mormonism?
I would say that it's certainly, I would say,
I guess I'm just sitting here kind of curious, Steve. Like, why can't we just say that Alyssa Grenfell is an anti-Mormon and that these other people are anti-Mormon?
No, the only reason I can't is because I don't know her well enough to be able to make that determination.
Yeah, but so here's one of the things in all of this, and I've heard what John has said. I've talked with John behind the scenes, and you've been very gracious to kind of connect us and things. And this is where it's sort of like, look, what you say speaks way quieter than what you actually do. And the content that John produces, the content that RFM produces, the content that Alyssa Grenfell produces is that the church is abusive, dishonest, dangerous, harmful, bigoted, and lying about all of its truth claims that it knows are false. Total lack of integrity. It is, and that's literally what they make their living doing in order to just say that the church is not what it claims to be. And not only that it's not what it claims to be, because that's one thing. I can respect people who think that the church is not true. I can. You're one of those people. You don't believe in the fundamental claims of the church. But there's something much bigger when you go beyond just saying, I don't think the church is true, to saying that the church is bad, bigoted, dangerous, abusive, and all of those kinds of things, because that goes from and the evangelicals obviously are doing that, but they're just focusing more on it in a spiritual sense, which to a certain extent is less problematic than saying that it's like beyond a spiritual sense, like it drives people to suicide. Like, there's a reason that people like what's his name, who was on John DeLynne's podcast, who he platformed, said he wanted to punch Elder Oaks in the face. That was what's his name? It's new name Noah, who I know has sort of been ousted from the ex-Mormon community.
Absolutely.
However, I don't know that there was such a giant outroar at that moment when he said that thing.
Right.
And what I'm saying is now let me be critical of my side for a moment.
Yeah.
Okay. There are people who go after people personally.
Yes.
On our side. And I will say
it's been done to me.
Yes, and I will condemn that. Okay? I will condemn, and I'll condemn right now publicly, as you're my friend, Stephen, the insinuations that were made by Robert Boylan about you. That was inappropriate. It was wrong, and I condemn it 100%. We do not attack people personally. We can attack their arguments. That is what a Christian does. Okay? And if I slip sometimes, I apologize. But that is the standard that I hold myself to. And I think that I should hold Latter-day Saints to. And so I do try and calm the temperature with that. But it's a little rich to be lectured from other people whose entire channels are dedicated not to building anything, but are simply dedicated to propagating a narrative, not just that the church is not true, but that the church is evil, dangerous, bigoted, abusive, financially malfeasant, and all of those things. That's a very different thing. And if all those things are true, if all those things were true, oh, I'd be right there with you. And not only that, I think you guys, I'd be right there with you making the content, because I would think, because the church is that bad, if it's as bad as you guys claim, it needs to be destroyed. And John Dolan should stop acting like it shouldn't. Because it's really weird to me when, you're saying, I don't want to be called an anti-Mormon, but this institution is abusive, all the other things that I just listed off. Like, there's a total disconnect there. If the church is as bad as you claim, it should be destroyed. It needs to be dismantled because it's hurting people.
Well, let me ask you a question, because actually I look at it from a different perspective. I come from the Reformed tradition, which is the idea that was highly critical of the Catholic Church, even calling it Antichrist. But the idea behind the Reformation was to reform some of the excesses of the Catholic Church, and the abuses and the lies and the abuse, and a lot of the same things that were hurled against the Mormon Church have been hurled against the Catholic Church. Now, but then you had that pressure put on that ultimately caused the Catholic Church to reform and hold on to the good parts of the church and eschew the bad stuff. And so I kind of look at it from the perspective that churches can both look. I grew up in an area where you had Hammond First Baptist of Jack Hyles, probably one of the biggest Christian cults in America at the time. I have had experiences with people that have been victims of, and again, this is in the evangelical world. There's abuse that happens in the evangelical world. I went through a 13-year period of being an atheist. I thoroughly deconstructed my faith. I felt like I was spiritually and religious, suffered a spiritual and religious PTSD. But like I tell people, I said, I left the evangelical village 20-something years ago, and I came back and the village was on fire. Well, my goal is not to let the fire continue. My goal is to get a hose and try to put the fire out. So I kind of look at it from the perspective of, because somebody's critical of the church doesn't mean they want to destroy it. They actually want to reform it. There are ex-Mormons, but there are ex-Mormons that want to burn it to the ground. I
agree. The Catholic analogy is interesting. Okay. Yeah. Because you're not a Catholic, because you don't believe the fundamental truth claims of the Catholic Church. Well, but in your world, the reason that you're outside of the Catholic Church is because you don't agree with it fundamentally. And I'm on the same team with you. Like, fundamentally, I would rather that the Catholic Church, I got to be careful how I say this. It's that I would rather everyone be a Latter-day Saint than be a Catholic. Okay. In other words, I would, in the perfect world, the Catholic Church wouldn't exist. Okay. Because in the perfect world, everyone is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I boldly proclaim that. Okay. Now, so I'm not looking like John Dolan and them look at themselves like the reformers, like Martin Luther or whatever, that are just trying to reform Mormonism the way people tried to reform the Catholic Church. Here's the problem. Martin Luther didn't believe in Catholicism. He rejected the Catholic Church ultimately. He eventually, one of the fundamental claims of the Catholic Church was that the Roman pontiff if you don't have the Roman pontiff as the supreme authority of the Catholic Church, then you don't have the Catholic Church anymore. That's the fundamental claim of the Roman Catholic Church. If the Roman Catholic Church doesn't have a pope, then it's not Roman Catholicism anymore. It's something different. And so you have to establish what the essential characteristics are of a church. And John simply does not believe in the church is what it claims to be. And if he wants to change it to be something else entirely, fundamentally, not in the non-fundamental, but in the fundamentals, then it wants to destroy it. And my thing is just own it. You guys, it's fine. You can say, I think the world would be better without this institution. Or if it was just relegated to being this sort of wacky, weird thing that some people enjoy.
Okay, so just to clarify, Martin Luther was excommunicated by the Lutheran Church, by the Catholic Church. He wanted to stay and he wanted to reform it. So that's just an argument. I just want to let you know he didn't ultimately reject them. I guess he would have rejected them at some point, but
would he have rejected the ultimate authority of the Pope in Rome?
Well, the idea of
you can't. The thing is, my point is just this, though. You have to understand, if you want to reform a church to such a degree that you are altering the fundamentals of what that church is, you are not reforming it, you are destroying it. If you want to make the claim, like I want to reform my Christian church so that it says that Jesus is not the Messiah and that we should worship Joseph Smith, that would not be a reform. That would be a destruction of what the church is. So things have, in philosophy, essential characteristics. They're the things that if they didn't have that thing, that characteristic, they wouldn't be that thing. And the things that John wants to reform would be things like the church should no longer claim that Joseph Smith was a prophet of God, because that's not true, and the church should be honest. And so it's like, okay, so you want the church to not be the church anymore. Like, he does want to destroy the church. He just doesn't want to be mean about it. And that's fine. Like, just own it. Say, I think that this thing is false, and falsehood should not be propagated. Like, why are you so afraid of just saying that?
You know, the thing, Jacob, too, is I want you to understand that there's a lot of pressure for, let me put it this way. There are ex-Mormon podcasters that I've had off-the-record conversations with and who have told me that overall they think that Mormonism is a net positive.
Oh, yeah. Tons of people do.
Yeah. And so I think that there's people within the ex-Mormon community that do have positive things to say about the church.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think that's where the positive things we need to work on. I think it's counterproductive to use language like John Dehlin wants to destroy the church, just because I think it makes him into you're kind of, I think it's dangerous language to use. I'm just telling you to maybe reconsider how you say that, because I think there are people out there that might take those words too literally. That's all I would just want to say. I also think there's a lot of nuance here. There's a lot of people that are in different spiritual journeys. There are people who are looking into this thing, and look, their shelves of, look, the question would be for people that have left the church because they had a deconstruction, or they're just in a, you know, what are we to do with them? How are they to be treated? There are some really good, fine, wonderful people I know that are in the ex-Mormon community. They're highly ethical, highly moral people who are hurting still to this day because of what happened to them in the church. What do we do with people like that? And do we call them ex-Mormons, or not ex-Mormons, anti-Mormon? Are all ex-Mormons anti-Mormon? I mean,
of course not. Of course not. And I would say, I would go even further to say this. I think most ex-Mormons aren't anti-Mormons. Most people who leave the church, I think, actually generally look back on it and say, yeah, it was a good thing. Yeah. And that's why it's so bizarre to me that you have people like John Dehlin who you know, you want to say like, well, you know, there are people out there who have a lot of positive things to say about the church, right? Mm-hmm. And I fully believe that. But, and let me just pull this up real quick, because I think it just makes the point, is that what does this say about the church? Show me the positive things that are in this. And I'm not saying they don't exist at all, but I'm saying for every video, if we were to go through this and say, does this portray the church positively or negatively? And we were to make a ratio of the videos on this, I would think you might have 1% that are positive. And so it's a matter of magnitude. When you want to say that I'm not an anti-Mormon, I think the church does a lot of good. It's like, well, according to your channel, it doesn't really seem like the church does that much good. And if it does do a lot of good, you never seem to talk about it. In fact, you talk about all the joy and healing beyond Mormonism, and the devil in Mormon theology and oh, you know, just this, the Mormon mission broke me, like these things. And it's like, okay, you can highlight all the negative stories. You can talk to everyone who has a terrible experience in Mormonism. That's fine. But you, like, where's the countervailing side of this? Also, why is it that Mormon Stories talks all day about these, it talks about all these abuses from different people, but it only gives one side of the story. You ever notice that? You never have the bishop who's being accused and being talked about. You never have that bishop in the room to be able to answer the accusations against them.
Well, I think that John would probably be more than happy to have people like that on his program, but most people don't, members of the church do not go on the program because they can't, or they're told they can't.
Yeah,
so,
if you're an actual leader of the church, you generally don't do that, and they don't want to get. And he's very smart to try and create a big, you know, he said, she said thing. But some of these are actual like legal allegations against people, to the point that it's like these are very serious allegations being made, and they're just being made on one side. My thing is I don't think you should believe anyone's story if you're on a controversial issue if you're only getting one side.
Okay, well, that's, I mean, I see validity to that point, but also, did you watch my interview last week where I had the episode, What John Dehlin Likes About Mormonism?
Yeah, I saw bits and pieces of it. I didn't get to watch the whole thing.
So my point being is that John is also willing to have those conversations too. And he may not be going on other podcasts having those because maybe the other ex-Mormon podcasters don't want to talk about that, but he's willing to have those types of conversations. And so to me,
he wasn't willing to have any conversations with me.
Well, you just don't know, Jacob, down the road. You just don't know what doors to open.
Here's the thing. I want to issue this to John. Okay. I want to just give me a percentage. In fact, not only that, John has said that he thinks the church does more good than bad. Is that fair to say? Stephen?
He may have said something along those lines.
I would guess, and I would guess a lot of people do. Okay, that's fine. Give me the percentage that you think. I'm going to say for John, I'll go below it. I'll say it does more bad than good. Let's just say that that's what he thinks, and let's say he thinks it's 30% is good, 70% is bad. Okay, so here's what I say. Let's make this reflect that. Let's make, John, your channel reflect what you actually believe about the church, because right now there's a massive disconnect between what you say you believe about the church versus what you produce. Now, here's the danger. If you begin to go and say a bunch of positive things about the church, how's your audience going to react? Because your audience has been fueled entirely by people who are upset about the church. And so does it make financial sense for you to begin to make episodes, having someone like me on, where we talk about the positive fruits of Mormonism in the social science literature? I'd be happy to do that. You can come on your show. There's tons of social science literature that shows that there's more meaning in your lives, larger families, less divorce. We could go through all that data. It's very objective, and let people know that, look, this does a lot of good in a lot of people's lives. So, John, I want to publicly say, I'd love to come on your show and talk about that literature. So,
well,
or even better, Steve, let's make it happen on your podcast. You can moderate between us. Let's do it. Let's get more book reviews in this.
Always willing to try to facilitate these types of conversations, which I think are really important.
Well, if John wants to say that he believes the church does so much good, then why are you walking away from a conversation like this, which just goes through the objective data about what's positive? Well, I think it'd be great.
That can be your next text to John Dehlin, right? So
I think it'd be great. Yeah. I know that we're starting to get low on time. I have some super chats here, but I want to, is there something you wanted to say? I felt like I've been kind of pushing too hard here.
Well, I guess what I'm just trying to say is that my experiences entering into this space has shown that there's more of a willingness on some of the larger ex-Mormon platforms to engage these types of conversations that I'm seeing within the evangelical world. Rather than engage me, they would just rather do hit pieces on me and not even give me the benefit of the doubt of having conversations, even after going to these organizations and offering to help them do better research. So I was very hurt by that. And so my personal experience is much more negative from the evangelical community. And I think that the stuff they're putting out is bad. Now, do I look at somebody like the Tanners who I tell people all the Tanners did was they put out the gospel text essays 50 years before the church did, in many ways. Did they say so? Did Sandra Tanner maybe say some aggressive things against the church in the past? Yeah, but she's since mellowed out. So I look at somebody like the Tanners were an invaluable resource to researchers, both in the church and out of the church, about early Mormon documents. So I think that's an example of a ex-Mormon ministry that has had a positive impact on the restoration. And so
I'm a believer. Here's the funny thing: as long as people are honest about like where they're at, I don't. You notice I'm not like attacking Sandra Tanner in them.
No.
I think they're wrong. I'll debate them, but they wear their cards on their sleeve. They're like, yeah, we're evangelicals that are against Mormonism, and we're going to go into all the historical data to try and disprove it. And it's like, all right, game on. Like, let's do this. Let's have the discussions. Let's go through the data. Let's do all that stuff.
Yeah, and that's an example of legitimate. I consider legitimate criticisms of the church were what the Tanners were doing. And so I kind of look at in other words, we can have, and again, the Tanners became friends with a lot of members of the church and with polygamists and all these different groups and have had cordial relations. So they even modeled how they could be, quote, an anti-Mormon ministry, but yet be good members of the community and friendly and neighborly to people. And I think that's what we need to model in this, is that we can have these disagreements, folks, but we don't need to resort to these horrible things that have been said about many people in these spaces, including myself and others. And because I'm afraid it's going to trigger somebody to do something really bad to people. And so that's how I look at it. Like, have our disagreements. Let's wrestle literally, physically, or mentally on these issues. And I think that's better discourse. But let's just watch the hateful rhetoric that's put out there, mostly from, I believe, historically from the Protestant evangelical community.
And I can agree that the Protestant evangelical community in the full breadth of the history definitely does have a much longer, and even today, like I will say, if I were to take the most extreme cases, man, the evangelicals they might take the cake, the really extreme ones, because it gets pretty wild. Real quick, Colby Reddish says, set aside whether you agreed to it, which is literally on video. Why wouldn't you want to discuss the historicity of the Book of Mormon? Well, first of all, I do talk about the historicity of the Book of Mormon. However, what you want is a debate on Book of Mormon historicity, and I don't have a level of expertise to where I would feel comfortable doing a debate on that topic. That's just it. I did have a debate where I kind of brushed into that with Trent Horn, who's a very worthy opponent, and people, if they want to kind of see my arguments, they can go check out that debate. But I generally only will debate things that I feel like I have sufficient expertise in, and that's just not an area I feel like I have sufficient expertise to debate. I will comment and talk about it, but I don't fault someone when someone says, look, I don't have a sufficient expertise in an area, and I generally don't. Most of the arguments and videos you'll see on my channel are not about the historicity of the Book of Mormon. That isn't my primary focus. So again, that's that. All right, Colby, you are just being really generous tonight. Does Jacob think he's a bit of a hypocrite for denouncing influencers for making money for cruises? Now he's doing so himself. So it's funny. I actually would say, first and foremost, that I don't have a problem with influencers making money as long as they do it ethically. I've had to think a lot about this. And in the past, I may have actually, I don't know. I think I may have made comments that were too flippant. And I'm not saying that, oh, just because Jacob, now I don't make money on the cruise that I'm going on, by the way, this one that's coming up next month. Like, they're hooking me up with the cruise, but like, I got to present and do all this stuff. I'm not making money on this. That's not why I'm doing it at all. That's not why I do my channel. And I don't make, like, you guys, I do not do this full time. I have two other businesses that keep me going. So, but as far as the ethics of making money, doing a podcast or whatever, I do have a problem when people put your testimony behind a paywall. So it's sort of like you can access this like extra advice that I give or something, or, you know, I do have a problem with that sort of thing. So as long as the content is available for free and people are donating to sort of do it, that's fine with me. And when it comes to this cruise, for example, any of the content that I put out will be publicly available. So anyone on the cruise wouldn't really get anything that they wouldn't get from me anyway. So just FYI on that. But yeah, as far as people making money doing this, Steve, if you make some money on this and you go get stuff, I don't think you're a bad guy. It's okay. We define what anti-Mormon is, not non-members.
We define what anti-Mormon is, not non-members. Who's we?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what they mean by this, but no, I've
maybe they're saying we define it, not non-members. We as Latter-day Saints define it.
Oh. Yeah, I mean, to some extent, but to me, it's like, I don't care who, nobody has the authority. I just want to know, what do you mean? When I talk about someone being an anti-Mormon, I'm talking about someone who is engaging in public, intentional, and repeated erosion of faith in the church's fundamental claims. That's it. Next, Justice, a large channel, Umpaville, I think is how you say it. Is that right?
Yeah. I think
Did a popular video originally called The Mormon Rabbit Hole, now a popular religion called a cult. I'd say it's 2/3 wrong. Have you seen it? Opinions. I bring it up because his reach is massive. I haven't. I've heard people talking about it. I haven't had time to review it. I get so many videos that I'm supposed to like check out and comment on. I'm sure you know that too, Steve.
Yeah.
So I haven't really. I did on Twitter let him know that I was willing to do that. I'm not sure what happened to this one. I'm trying to take it off the screen. All right. So Camel Saddle says, you underestimate how much John's show is contributing to yours, Jacob. Consider just how much anti-Mormon criticisms and rhetoric has led to more thoughtful faith in yourself and countless others. So first of all, I would rather my channel didn't exist, because then there wouldn't be a need for me to kind of push back on this stuff. But there is something to be said for, I don't know. It's like, it's one of those arguments. It's like, hey, if cancer didn't exist, there wouldn't be all these people doing all this charitable work to fight cancer. It's like, it'd be better if cancer didn't exist. That's kind of my view on this. Colby says, my bishop was in prison. So, all right, well, good. He deserved to be in prison. Doc says, thank you for all you do, doing the Lord's work. Doing the Lord's work. All righty. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. We got Through the Mist. John is Antichrist according to his own admissions, at least according to his interview with the Paul brothers, where he talks about he talks about an insidious doctrine in relation to the atonement of Jesus Christ. Okay. What do you think about that? Do you think is someone being anti-Christian when they say that the atonement of Jesus Christ is an insidious doctrine?
Yeah, the thing about this, Jacob, is, look, we all can turn on our microphones and get very emotional and say things. So I would look at the totality of my conversations with John, and I would say he's not anti-Christian. And if anything, he's still struggling with these things. I just think it's really important that, John, I remember when John said that, and, it's troublesome, but at the same time, at least, he's being John DeLynn at the same time too, So, I mean, if that's how he felt at the time and he was responding that way, if John,
I think that'd be an interesting topic. I would love to talk with John about his feelings about Christianity. Yeah. If we're going to talk about the positives of Mormonism fits within the Christian tradition.
And a couple years ago, I did an episode with John's thoughts about Christianity. It's already out there.
I would think, I don't know if you'd ask him as hard of questions as I would. All right. I think Jacob has just agreed to have a discussion about the good versus bad about the Book of Mormon with Colby on Steve's show. No, I think you're go back and re-listen to what I said. I'm not sure.
We're almost there. We're almost there.
I know. Colby, I know you just, I'm open to having some sort of a conversation, but it would depend on the topic. And I'm not looking to have a debate with Colby Reddish unless it's on a topic that I feel comfortable debating. And if this is some way to shoehorn me into his gotcha moments about Book of Mormon historicity, it's like, all right, fine. Like I'm not interested in that debate. There are some debates that I'm interested in. There's others I'm not. Why are you afraid to debate Book of Mormon historicity, Jacob? Calling out John for being afraid seems like a projection. No, I've already said, if I don't feel like I have a sufficient subject knowledge on something, then I won't debate it. And I could turn around, Colby, and ask you the same question. Why are you afraid to debate me on if transgenderism is real when you're the one who has publicly accused me of being a bigot for saying that transgenderism isn't real? So am I a bigot for my thoughts on transgenderism and thinking that it's nothing more than a mental disorder? All right, you can think that. And do you want to debate me on it? You're the one making the claim. Maybe you're not a subject enough expert on it and you can take that route, and that's fine. I won't hold you to any different standard than I hold myself. So,
All right.
Colby, thank you for hanging out with me tonight. Anyway, any final thoughts, Stephen, before we roll?
First of all, I thought this was an interesting conversation. It went directions I wasn't expecting, but I think that was kind of fun. I do think that there's many more conversations like this that we can have. I think it's important to be able to discuss our differences, which we did plenty today, but we can walk away from it still being able to have a conversation on the phone tomorrow and say, hey, what's up, Jacob? And I think that's really important, that we can show that it can happen in these spaces. It doesn't have to always be about attack. It can be about this. And look, I push back on Jacob. Jacob pushes back on me. But it can be done in a civil way. And now more than ever, we need that. So, Jacob, I just want to thank you so much for us together collaborating on tonight's episode on both of our channels.
Yeah, it's definitely been fun. And I agree 100%. My mantra is be hard on ideas, but soft on people. I'm not perfect at that, everyone. If I'm called out for it, I'll acknowledge it and I'll try and do better. And I hope that as all of us get out there and engage, don't back off. It's okay. Have the discussions, have the debates, do all the things. But at the end of the day, let's try and remember that we're each human beings. Even John and I have had some off the record conversations recently that were really good. I actually very much enjoyed them. And so I hope that kind of stuff can continue. So, all right. Thanks, everybody. Hope you all have a great evening.